Well, here we are once again on another edition of the Brattlecast, where, as I said earlier, the curious come to find out cool stuff. And there's always something around the corner and underneath that book flap. I'm Jordan Rich, and with me is the proprietor of the famous bookshop that we refer to, the Brattle Bookshop. It's on West Street, right in the middle of downtown Boston near the Common. And today, you're actually coming off a very recent appraisal, and you wanted to comment on it because every one of them is different and unique. But share with us what you experienced.
Well, first of all, when you say recent, we do this in the afternoon. This is when I was at a couple of hours ago.
Okay, so it's really recent.
It's really recent. And what is it? There are a lot of reasons to do appraisals. I mean, all day long at the store, the people I work with, when I do Antiques Roadshow, when I do talks, I do verbal appraisals. People want to know, is this a value, is that a value? And those are very easy, sometimes very interesting, sometimes take some research. But then there are times when people need formal appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever. And then there are times when institutions or libraries or museums need appraisals. And many times those appraisals are because they're loaning something. In other words, another museum is doing an exhibit, and they go, well, you have something that would be perfect in this exhibit. Can we borrow it? And when that happens, they want an insurance policy on whatever's going out. And so I got called by a local historical society in Boston that I am a member and I like to help and have fabulous stuff, by the way. As a matter of fact, have incredible stuff. But so I said, sure, I'll come by and I'll do the appraisal. And I'd like to actually see the items. I don't like as much to do it from either the online or from a copy or so on. Can I see it? And they said, yeah, fine. There's no problem. And so I'm going there. And one of the things is an original inaugural speech of Thomas Jefferson's. Now, it's a printed one.
All right.
And let me just say, in this case, this all comes from a museum that a lot of people don't realize. It's right near the Fenway, the Massachusetts Historical Society.
Okay.
That has incredible stuff, puts on incredible exhibits. So, and they like to show off their items. So I encourage everybody, if you're walking from, let's say, Kenmore Square to Fenway Park, especially if it's a weekday, try to get in and join and see it. But anyways, this is Thomas Jefferson. Massachusetts Historical Society has one of the best collections of Thomas Jefferson's, other than the University of Virginia, because some of Jefferson's relatives and families lived in Massachusetts and gave this stuff.
Great.
But this is a copy of the inaugural speech, 1801, when he first became president. And it's an original printed copy. Now, they do have a silk copy. There was one silk copy, and guess who got that one? Jefferson. But this Mass Historical also has that one.
Wow.
But they're not loaning that one. They're loaning the other. So I'm reading Jefferson's first speech. The next thing, though, that they had, and again, they're loaning that to a museum for an exhibit, and I get to actually touch it. And then the next thing they had, which really was sort of, I actually asked them, is it sort of, why does the Massachusetts Historical Society have a long letter of Jane Austen?
Jane Austen?
Yeah, I mean, I actually said, gee, does she have a lot to do with Boston history and Massachusetts history? They said, no, but there was a woman named Quincy, one of the Quincy family, who in the early 1800s was a big fan of Jane Austen's writing. And she wrote to Jane Austen's brother after Austen had died and said, I love her works, sort of a fan letter. Mm-hmm. And they sent her, they said, oh, well, here. They sent her a 4-page letter of Jane Austen. They said, well, maybe you would like this.
That's really very cool.
And, you look at, and Jane Austen right now is one of the hottest, highest priced first edition authors because there's been a tremendous resurgence in women's literature, women writers, also in romance writing. It's incredibly popular, and she's one of the best. There are very, very few letters that are in the public. Now, this one isn't, but they're loaning that to another institution. And they said, up until recently, we didn't even realize we had this because they got the Quincy family papers and someone was doing deep research into it and said, oh, by the way, you've got a Jane Austen letter here. But again, I got to sit there, look at it, hold it, touch it. I'll talk a little bit about price later, but the one that really interested me was the next item. And again, one museum to another, a second museum that was going, but this is the third one. And this was what really got me. Do an appraisal. Can you do an appraisal? We're loaning 2 John Winthrop letters.
The original governor?
The original governor from 1630. These letters that he wrote when he was in Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Right.
To his wife on one case and to his son in another case.
Wow.
And these letters were done in the 1630. Now, I noticed the place was Sudbury. So what he must have done is gone from Winthrop, where he was, which wasn't called Winthrop quite then, probably just up the Charles River, because that's how you would get to Natick, Sudbury, in that area.
01776 is the zip code at Sudbury. I know that by heart. And that, of course, 1776. That is very... So what was the condition of that particular...
Well, there were 2 letters. The letters were good. His handwriting was fine. And fortunately for me, what they do have a transcription of the letter. So I didn't have to sort of... A lot of times when you go through older letters, I mean, particularly when you get back 300-400 years old, not only can the handwriting be difficult, and in this case it wasn't, but just the words they used. Sometimes you aren't sure about whether you're not reading the handwriting correctly or you just don't recognize the word. But it was fascinating. First of all, in one of the letters he was writing to his wife, he had a son who had a family in Massachusetts Bay. His son had died. And the family had 3 children. And he was writing back to England to his wife. And probably the first his wife was hearing that
probably
one of her...
weeks or months later.
Right, that one of her sons had died. So it wasn't just a perfunctory letter, hi, I'm in Massachusetts. It was really going into a lot of details and personal items, which the content of the letter makes a big difference. The paper was in good shape. And the second letter was a letter to a different son talking about, could you pay this bill, could you pay that bill, and talking a little bit about the business of Massachusetts Bay. And, of course, Winthrop didn't come to Massachusetts to be an explorer. He came to make money. The whole idea of the colony was to get in there and get items and trade and make money for the company who supported the thing. But I'm looking at this and I'm saying, this is actually a letter of John Winthrop. The difficult part when you do appraisals, the Thomas Jefferson that I mentioned first, there are a lot of Thomas Jefferson items. There are letters out there. There are broadsides. There are declarations. There are printings. So it will be fairly easy for me because literally I haven't done the pricing of these yet that they need to get for the insurance. But there'll be a lot of examples of similar things. I'll be able to find them. The Jane Austen will be a little bit more difficult because some of her letters, there are only a few on the market, and the few that are on the market or were sold were to relatives and talking about her books, which would be a much higher value. But you're still talking a signature of Jane Austen can go for thousands of dollars, so a letter. And then Winthrop is even going to be the most difficult, and it will be fascinating research, but there really aren't any letters of Winthrop's to compare it to. He signed a couple of documents, when he was governor, something signed by him as governor, which he did sign things, that in and of itself can sell for $10,000 or $15,000 just because he wrote his name on it, and the rest of it was in someone else's hand or printed. So now I've got to figure out, okay, are there any other Winthrop letters available? And I'm not finding any on a quick look. Are there any other colonial figures like that, like maybe Bradford or some of the others? Have any of their letters showed up? Are there any comparisons? How do you figure out what really is a fair price? And that's the next step in all of this.
It's a hunt, and it's Sherlock Holmes at times, because you're using all the modern technology, but thankfully the Mass Historical Society offers a wealth of possibilities.
And they did have transcriptions, so again, I don't have to spend a few hours reading it. And probably one of my best sources when I get into something like this, and I always tell people, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know who does know. And you have to be on good enough terms with them that they'll answer you.
Yeah, you always have to treat the help well, no matter who they are, not even the help.
Not even the help. Colleagues, professors,
everyone,
historians. And you want to stay on good terms. And so I'll make a call, and a few of them will go, well, maybe this, maybe that. A few of them say, well, wait a minute. A letter of his did show up at some library, but it's going to be a fascinating research project that I'll get involved in. And one of the people who work at the store, he loves doing this type of research. I'll probably get him involved in a little. Sometimes I'll have to admit we start going down a rabbit hole with all of this. And
do you actually? I would think so. Feel an energy, a pulse when you're holding something like a Jefferson piece, right?
A Jefferson. Paul Revere or John
it's
Winthrop.
It's got to be just mind-blowing.
Well, also, my wife is originally from Winthrop.
Oh.
And you know, and you have to stop and think. Winthrop, which is right near Logan Airport there, the reason it's called Winthrop is because John Winthrop and his family were there.
You think Revere Beach has just showed up like that? It's Revere, Paul Revere.
Exactly. But, you know, when you say you can actually go in and put my little pinky finger on something that John Winthrop touched, hold, felt. And, of course, that's why these things have such tremendous value, not only from a historical perspective, but quite honestly, from the historical perspective, you can go to the website of the Historical Society and be able to read and get the history part. But to actually think, John Winthrop sat down once. I hope it was a sunny day by the beach. Maybe he was out sunning himself.
The Cape was nice during that time.
I tend to doubt that. But you know, that he was actually thinking and writing a letter to his wife and the emotion that must have gone into that. And here's this piece of paper almost 400 years later that I'm looking at and going, wow.
When Ken Gloss wakes up in the morning, he jumps out of bed. He can't wait to get started because every day's an adventure.
Adventure. Now, one of the things that we've mentioned on the podcast a few times that people had ideas, and just before I came to this one, someone said, well, I love going to your store and I love local history. Could you do a podcast about local history? I don't know that he was really thinking about talking about John Winthrop letters, but that's again, the area is big and fine, but I am going to do a podcast in the future on local histories, like town histories, list histories of the sections of the local areas and so on, and get into that. But local history is also letters of John Winthrop.
Absolutely. What a fascinating Brattlecast this turned out to be, and not unlike any of the others, as a matter of fact. They're all fascinating.
Well, what I would also say to people is if you're interested in local history, Massachusetts history, really look into the Mass Historical Society. It's right on the Fenway. It's one of those treasures that a lot of people maybe don't think of first, but it's one of the best in the country.
Well, thank you for sharing that gem, and thank you for everything you do. Ken Gloss, Brattle Bookshop. This is Jordan Rich saying thank you for listening.